Hi, welcome back to Fee Makes Art. I am Sophia, and this week I wanted to talk about balancing being a creative and also working full time in a job that is not creative. There were a few things I wanted to just address before I get into talking about all of this. Um, so I do realize that I am privileged in several ways. Um, I have a stable living situation. I have a somewhat stable financial situation, and the only person I have to take care of is myself. So, all of that to say, I might have a little bit more time and space and resources to create art than other people. And if you're watching this and you don't necessarily have those privileges, I definitely don't want you to feel like you still can't create art in some way. I think art is a really healthy and healing journey, and it can be really helpful for mental health, for self expression, you know, just feeling better in general. So, I definitely don't want you to think that art isn't for you if you don't necessarily have all of the time and resources and can do everything that I'm about to talk about. Just take what you can from this video and apply it in a way that makes sense for your life. Don't feel like just because you can't do every single thing that I'm about to talk about that, you can't be a creative and you can't make art. Um, so before I dive into how I balance working a full-time job and being a creative and giving some suggestions on how you can also do that balancing act, I wanted to talk a little bit about what art is, in my opinion. So the Oxford Dictionary defines art as the expression of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Now, I do not 100% agree with this definition. I definitely think that art is a human form of expression, but I think a lot of the definitions of art are very narrow and limiting. They tend to focus on visual art or fine arts and kind of ignore other forms of art that aren't super traditional or seen in museums or categorized, like I said, as fine art or visual art. Music is art, writing is art, I think. Cooking can be an art. Really, anything that gets you expressing yourself and using your creativity, using your imagination, I think that can all be art. I also don't think art is necessarily something that needs to be created with the intention of it being shared. I think art can be something you do just for yourself. Um, it can be very personal. If it's not something you want to share, you definitely don't have to. I think a personal art practice, something that's just for you can be really beneficial. It can be really healing and helpful. Um, yeah, I don't feel like you need to be pressured into sharing your art, if you that's not something you're interested in doing. If that is something you're interested in doing, I think it's great. I think it's fun. Um, it can be a powerful form of resistance. It can be a powerful form of building community, but again, you don't have to share your art to be an artist. Um, so, kind of getting into the main topic of this video, which is how I balance art and working full time. So, just some information about my working situation. I am at work 8.5 hours a day. I work a job that has nothing to do with my college degree and is also not very creative. I'm in a customer facing role, which can be very draining for me. I work in a very loud environment, which can also be very overstimulating for me. And sometimes when I get off work, art is the last thing I am thinking about. I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm overstimulated. I just want to crawl into bed and scroll on my phone or just go to sleep. Um, and some days I get off work and I'm super excited to come home and make something. So it really is a spectrum. Um, and I think that's pretty normal for most people. Some days you have more energy than others, and some days at work are rougher than others. So, getting into how I balance work and art. So, just some information on my situation. I am at work 8.5 hours a day. I go in between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning, and I'm off between 4 and 5. Um, Sometimes when I get home from work, I'm very overstimulated, I'm very tired, I'm very hungry. I don't necessarily want to create art. I kind of just want to crawl in bed and go to sleep or scroll on my phone for hours. But I think it's really important to resist that temptation. I also think, I work in a job that has nothing to do with my college degree. It is a customer facing role. It can be very stressful at times. I will say I do have the privilege of not having to bring work home with me. I know some people don't have that experience. You might have to answer work emails or you might have a big project deadline that you have to keep working on once you're home. I don't have any of that. So when I get off work, I'm done with work, which is really nice. So the first thing I do when I get off work is I try to switch from work mode to being at home mode. For me, this usually looks like changing out of my work clothes, eating dinner, having a fun little drink like a Spindrift or a LaCroix, and kind of settling in for the night. Um, I would recommend having a space where you typically create your art or work on your art. For me, this is a little cozy corner setup in my boyfriend's office. It's literally just a toddler mattress on top of those like 6 cube shelves from Target. I have two of those shelves and a 4 cube shelf at the end, and I put a toddler mattress on it, and I put some blankets and stuffed animals and pillows, made it nice and cozy, and that is usually where I do my knitting or crocheting and sometimes my journaling. If I'm gonna do more of like paper crafts, anything that has like a lot of little pieces like beadwork or sewing, I'll usually do that in here in this office, at my desk, which is really dirty right now. Ignore that. But I think having like a space that you typically work in can be really helpful in that kind of switching modes from being outside in the world, working, and then creating. I think that can be really helpful. And obviously, not everybody has the space to do that. I have my own office. I have that spot in my boyfriend's room. I can also work on the couch if I want, on the coffee table. But if that's not necessarily something you have access to, your spot could just look like a lap desk that you carry around the house to wherever you're going to work that night, or just a bag with your art supplies that you pull out, and set up wherever you can. So I definitely don't want you to feel like you are limited to having like a physical space necessarily that needs to be where you create. Um, it can be more, what's the word I'm looking for? More fluid than that. It can be more of like, these are my supplies that I bring, and I create that space where I am and where I have time and space to do that. Um, Another thing that I try to do is I try to do something creative every single day. Um, this can look like working on a project. So I do typically knit or crochet every single day after work. And I also try to do journaling every day. Sometimes I don't get around to that, but I try my best. But that doesn't necessarily have to be like what your daily practice looks like. Your daily practice might just be doing a little doodle on your lunch break or writing down a few lines about your day, trying a new recipe, coloring. listening to music, just relaxing, any way that you're engaging with art, I think can be really calming, really relaxing. But I also don't want you to feel like art always has to be relaxing. Maybe you're really angry one day, and so you sit down and you journal about it and you get all of that anger and frustration out, or you're really angry and you listen to some angry music and you sing to it, scream to it, do whatever you need to do. Art, I think, is there for you in whatever way you need it to be at that time in your life, that time in your day. Um, there's no rules. Like, that's what makes it fun. There's no rules you have to follow. There's no guidelines or anything like that. I mean, yeah, there's techniques, but you can pick and choose what you want and make it your own. And I think that's what makes it really fun. Um, but I'm getting off track. So yeah, I try to do something creative every day, even if it's just small. I think having a daily practice, is really helpful. Um, I also think, though, that you should listen to your body. If you are really tired, maybe instead of crocheting for an hour, you need to just take a nap, or you need to go to bed early that night, or you need to, take a shower, brush your teeth, um, take care of yourself in a different way. And I think that's okay. And there's no shame in doing that. Um, I think it's important that art doesn't become a chore. It doesn't become something that you have to do every single day. It is something you look forward to doing. It is something you have fun doing, something that is productive and helpful in your life. And when I say productive, I don't mean that you are like being productive in the way you would be when you like do your dishes. I mean productive in that it is helping you in some way. I also think, maybe you don't have time to sit down and work on a project every day. You could even do something as simple as, doing your hair different, or putting on your makeup or whatever, or wearing a fun pair of shoes if you can to work, painting your nails, doing whatever like little form of self expression that you want to do that day. That can just be your little thing for the day. Putting on a fun pair of earrings. I think it's important to remember that art doesn't necessarily need to be a physical thing that you are working on producing. Um, it can be more ephemeral than that. Like, you're going to put your makeup on and you're going to wash it off at the end of the day. And that can be your creative act for the day, is doing your eyeshadow or putting your lipstick on or whatever. And, I don't really wear makeup, but something I like to do is paint my nails, or, wear fun jewelry, do my hair fun, anything that's kind of like expressing yourself. And I know this can be hard too in like the context of work, because some workplaces have stricter dress codes than others. Mine doesn't really have any limitations on jewelry, except that I do have to like hide my septum piercing when I'm at work, which I kind of hate and honestly makes me feel not as much like myself. But I can wear whatever color shoes I want. I can paint my nails whatever color. I can wear whatever earrings, do my hair. However, I do have to wear scrubs in a specific color, which is kind of boring to wear the same thing every single day. But, there are other ways you can work around it. And I think just finding those little ways that you can make it fun um, can be really important. I also think that, again, like I said, having resources to create art can be a challenge. I think it's important to remember, you can thrift your supplies, you can do trades with friends, or, you know, go on Facebook, see what's on Facebook Marketplace. Like, hey, does anyone have some yarn? Does anyone have some sewing needle? I don't know. Not crowdsource. What am I trying to think of? Share within your art community. I know in my town, we have a little store that has a big art supply section that's all donated, and you can just go in and it's like $2 for a pound of art supplies, and that's how they do it. See if there are things like that in your community. I know some libraries also have like maker spaces where you can borrow sewing machines, woodworking equipment, stamps, paper cutters, stuff like that. See if there's anything like that in your area. Thrifting art supplies, you don't always have to buy fabric from the fabric store. You can turn an old bed sheet into something, or thrift a sweater and unravel the yarn and use that for a different project. I think, that's another thing that makes art fun, is getting creative with how you source your materials. Um, yeah, and it can be a challenge, but cutting things out of your newspaper ad that you get in the mail every week, or junk journaling with just your random trash that you have throughout the day. Just, I don't want you to feel like art is this like unattainable, inaccessible thing that you have to have all this money and time and space to do. It can really meet you where you are. And I think that's really beautiful. So just be creative, make your art, share your art if you want to. Find ways to express yourself. I feel like this was a very rambly video. And my thoughts might not have been as clear and concise as I wanted them to be, but I hope that something in this video resonated with you and maybe gave you some thoughts or ideas about what you can be doing in your daily life to work on your art. Yeah. Anyways, I think I'm gonna end there because this is getting kind of long. But thank you for watching. Hopefully next week you will come back as well. And yeah, have a good week. Make some art. Um, do some journaling. I don't know. Find a new source for your art supplies. Just have fun with it. And don't take yourself too seriously. Okay, bye.